Hi, Dad.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for being here on the show.
You're very welcome. I finally meant it. You drug me in here, and here I am,
Yep. Thank you.
interviewing your dad. You're welcome. Very welcome.
Well, I brought you on the show because the interview is in response to a question that a student sent in about addiction. Kind of, that's the core of their question, I think, more so. They talk about the rise of drugs and wanted to know a little bit more about the perspective from the user. But I think at the core of what they're talking about is they have questions about addiction. So I haven't exactly figured out how to get an interview with someone who has dealt with addiction, but I thought the next best thing would be to talk to someone from who could give us some insight from the law enforcement perspective. So that's why I asked you on the show, because I'm like, I think I may know someone.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So before we tackle the question, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background in law enforcement? How'd you get in law enforcement?
Actually, I didn't want to be
No. Okay.
in law enforcement when I started off. I wanted to be more like a firefighter or paramedic or something.
You
like
wanted
that.
to be a firefighter?
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Not knowing all the things you've said.
But what I found with myself, I was drawn to the excitement and the fun of law enforcement. And this is late 80s, of course, and into the early 90s. But the long story short, I've been in law enforcement for 32 years. Most of my experience, and not even as a goal, has been in drug enforcement, arresting, finding cures and developments for communities with drug addiction, things of that nature. So I've been doing it for quite a long time. Before I promoted, my last tenure was a supervisor within our drug investigation section for 10 years. And I supervised major narcotics team and street narcotics teams. So I'm well versed in narcotics, but not by choice. Not by choice. And that could range from anything from cells, arresting people on a small level, or to working and investigating clandestine labs of that nature. So with that, all the training does come. Mm-hmm. That's a little bit of a quick 32-year background. And your question was to answer it, how did I get into it? My first introduction into narcotics was actually a heroin detention and arrest within a jail facility. I actually, working in the jails, caught someone injecting heroin into their veins, into their arm.
Oh my gosh.
They were passing it around, and they drew a new charge because of that. So that was my first heroin arrest. That was early 90s. And from there, just by the way the career takes you, I began working a lot with narcotics. But when you do, you start working with a lot of addicts and addiction. So you interview a lot of addicts. You empathize with a lot of addicts and people of addiction. And the first thing you do realize and learn is that everybody is different. Not everyone is the stereotypical drug addict. And they got up one day and out of bed and said, hey, I'm going to go use some drugs. Everybody is different. And that's why listening to the question of your student, it's a very good question, and it's very common in today's day and age. And I'm glad people ask it because it is just not a blanket statement. And with that, from my end of experience, it is highly important to interview and do research and talk to people that have went through addiction and rehabilitation, because that's how I learned. Now, I wasn't a drug addict. I obviously didn't use narcotics in my life, but I have interviewed and spoke to people that have, and they have a story to tell. And there are plenty of people out there, famous people or people, everyday people that have went through addiction and therapy to kick addiction. So I do recommend researching and speaking with them because they can give you their personal perspective.
Yeah.
What is going on in their life, if that makes sense. Because it is on a personal level. Addiction is personal and it's different. It is not the same, and it has evolved. And I know you mentioned history. To understand narcotics, you have to understand history. We can track narcotic use back to AD and BC. There's reference of narcotics in the Bible. There's reference of narcotics in a lot of different literatures of those ages, even your Egyptian hieroglyphics. And so altering drugs was always there. Did we use them for medical purposes? Did we use them for maybe religious events of things of that nature? Or even fraudulent witch doctor kind of things? Absolutely. It's always been used, and it's always been of an organic product. And that's very important when he's asking about addicts, because most of through history has been organic. When I say that, from a plant or a leaf of things of that nature. Because nowadays, the way it has evolved, we have a new, what they'll call designer drugs or synthetic compounds to these organic drugs. And they have heightened the drugs in a good sense to be used in the medical field scientifically. But on the other end, they also have enhanced the other organic drugs to be more effective, therefore adding to more addiction, depending on your personal emotional level to the addiction.
So from the history perspective, I'm not exactly sure, when did drugs start becoming more and more synthetic?
Well, that's with the modern times.
Okay.
So now you're talking taking the actual molecular structure and compounds and playing with them. So you're with a synthetic material, and I'll speak as general as I can, you're matching the organic material. So let's take a drug like heroin. Mm-hmm. It comes from the poppy plant and poppy growth. And that's how it is harvested, which we can track in a modern day back to the Orient, which was very popular. And when the West was one, and how the Orient came in. We're not getting into the weeds there. But the reason why it's important, it was always a natural product. And it was used a lot in the medical field. And the medical field is really where the synthetic comes from. Because what they learned from, example, heroin, we can mirror that compound, but with synthetic products. Now, with the synthetic product, scientifically, we can actually turn the volume up or turn it down, which in and of itself is a great revelation. And it's a great invention through our modern society, because it's used in the medical field every day. Everything from an epidural to a Vicodin tablet, things of that nature, can be synthetic, or they can be organic. And that has changed the game. We used to be, in law enforcement, if we just go back to the 60s and 70s, you have probably about 5 or 6 big drugs: cocaine, heroin, marijuana, different, but nowadays it is a plethora of different kind of drugs and different kind of effects and enhancements, because of the fact, not only do we have scientists working with these narcotics, you have garage laboratory people, their own little garage scientists doing this.
Breaking Bad status.
Yes, and they have learned how to develop this and buy it in bulk and things of that nature. And I don't want to get ahead of myself. But that's very important to know that has contributed, and I think he kind of went to that question. It has contributed to addiction. Mm-hmm. It has contributed to doctors illegally prescribing, or people going out and finding something that's a little bit more. But you got to remember, it's happened on a personal level. But on the personal level, more people have been injured or diagnosed with injuries, or so on. Mm-hmm. So,
I didn't have the entire story for why this student sent in this particular response, but he took my class the semester that the COVID pandemic shutdown happened. Okay. So I had a chance to actually get to know him beyond just online teaching. And I think he had a friend who was in the Marine Corps who had a hard time adjusting to civilian life. And I don't know the rest of that story, but I believe that's what inspired him to send in that response.
And like I said before, it's an extremely important and valid question, because to him, it's on a personal level.
Yeah.
And we'll just go in the context of that right now. It's his friend.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to understand, and this is what I deal on with deal with people that their loved ones have passed away from a overdose or an addiction. It's hard to go and talk to the families and be involved in that investigation. That being said, what he said, and he's probably dealing with a close friend, he's probably looking for help for him, I would say. And it's hard to watch an addict go through the trials and tribulations of that addiction. It is very personal. It is hidden. It is up and down. It could be hurt and pain from the war, or it could be an injury. You got in a car wreck in your back. We know that. And it sounds like he is asking that. He's trying to find a way. Now, that being said, searching for that answer can be very tough. Mm-hmm. And I'll go with the private side of things. A lot of addiction today is very private because it can be.
What exactly do you mean by, can you expand on that a little bit? Like, by
well, yeah,
private?
Through the modern age and through the synthetics that have been developed, they are prescribed. They are prescriptions from a doctor. Your medical records are private. There are laws that protect them. So you can be injured and prescribed a medication, let's say an Oxycontin, and be taking it, and no one needs to know about it. No one needs to know, or it's not anyone's right for them to find out that you've been prescribed so many for so much time. The problem is you could have been overprescribed, not by necessarily at fault of the doctor, but your body does become, and I'm not going to get in the weeds of predisposition of genetics in addicts, but your body does become a source for these things because it yearns for them. And what the drug does, it tricks your mind saying, hey, I have no more pain. And gosh darn it, this feels really good.
Yeah.
And there's an old saying that we're all one injury away from being an addict now.
Oh, that's a saying?
That is a saying.
Didn't know that.
But there's a truth to that. And I'm speaking candidly. I'm not, lecturing or in front of people trying to teach you narcotics. I'm speaking more on a personal level and what I have dealt with. I've had my own friends pass away from narcotics and things of that nature and be addicted. And I know people that are still going through it, and it is sometimes private and on a personal level. And I say that because a lot of us, and I'm sure he wants to help his friend, but his friend has to get to that breaking point, that bottom of the barrel, to where I need help if they're willing, if the drug has not consumed them so much. Now, I can't speak to a lot of that because I've never been an addict. And this is where I would defer to the expert. And I'll tell them, subject matter experts of being an addict. There are a lot of great sources out there and people you can talk to. And I highly promote that because I am not a subject matter expert with being an addict, but I have experienced working with addicts and addicts that have passed away and battles we've lost trying to help people in the sense of death or in the sense of them going to prison. It's very, very hard to deal with. Even the laws today are becoming softer because there is an empathetic side to it. It says, why are we putting an addict in jail when they're addicted to a product? And now it's not their fault. Yeah, they started out. Yeah, they started taking it. But why are they spending years in prison with hard guys that are murderers and really bad people when all their problem was an addiction? And now you're just talking 21st century. We're actually really starting to marinate that and massage it and look at that. And that's why you're seeing a lot of breakdown in a lot of different incarceration formats. Farms and things, and maybe a low level type of incarceration, because crime is majority based or caused by some sort of drug. Any arrest I've made, I would say probably almost in the 100th percentile, is someone's under the influence of something. So it does affect, but it's for different reasons. It does affect your habits and abilities and behaviors, but it's for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, when I first showed you this or had you listen to this question, and we kind of had our initial debrief or discussion and we're, kind of working through it, we were ruminating on this question of when did the opioid problem go from being a problem to an epidemic? Because when I heard his response, he kept it very broad in general and talked about drug use and addiction. But the thing that came to my mind was more specifically the opioid epidemic that we're dealing with right now. And then listening to what you said earlier about this transition, how we have basically, lived through this increase of synthetic drugs. I think there's an overlap there, maybe, that this increase in synthetic drugs is perhaps contributing to drugs being a problem, to going from drugs to being an epidemic, more specifically opioids. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you answered it. And it happened over time. It's hard to explain, but if you look at history, it makes sense.
I love that you said that.
Oh, yeah.
I try to.
Just for everyone out there, I am talking to my daughter, so this is really weird, but that's okay.
You mean it's not normal to talk about drugs at the kitchen table growing up?
No, it's not.
Oh, so it's just cop kids who are
wise
asses.
Kids that get browbeat and yeah.
Sorry, Grandma. Grandma listens to the show, and
That's
just cursed.
That's all right. Well, Grandma can. Grandma's the boss. So don't go against Grandma. But sorry. But what you said makes complete sense. So in the 70s, and this is why they don't like to talk to police officers and addicts and things like that, because it makes sense how things develop. And it is the fault of everyone, from politicians to businesses to doctors. I'm sorry, we all have to be accountable for what occurred.
Mm-hmm.
So in the late 70s, when gangs were popping off, you had a lot of denial in cities, and a lot of influential cities that would say, we don't have gang violence, we don't have gang problems. Well, you have 25 registered gangs living in your city that are committing crimes.
I think you might have a problem.
You have a problem. But I am telling you, and that people don't like this, I've seen it. No, we don't. We don't have a gang problem. Yeah, you do. So now you move up into the 80s, where drugs are beginning to highly influence a lot of violent crime. The 80s were a whole other subject matter, with violent crimes and drug addiction on all ages, all levels, all races. It just didn't matter. The 80s went nuts. It did. I'm being candid.
Well, it's a history podcast. You can. We're not.
And it evolved into other things, just like into the 90s, to where cities were like, well, we don't have drug addiction. We don't have drug problems here. Now we're getting into a whole different era of drug development, and the synthetics and the designers start coming in. And in the 90s, they are capping on these organic drugs, and this is very generally speaking, without being too involved, but organic drugs jumping into the 90s, where we're using more synthetic drugs. But with that use comes the development of synthetic drugs, which implodes it into cocktails and things like that. And sometimes I'll refer to cocktails. In this day and age right now, as we speak, it is very important to know not one person just use one drug. They'll use 3 or 4 different drugs. But I won't get into that too much. It's called the push-pull effect of what we refer to it as. But my point is, for the history, you're exactly right. It did develop into a pandemic. And I call it a pandemic, and people don't like that.
Do you mean epidemic or pandemic?
I'm calling it a pandemic.
Okay.
Now, that's me.
Yeah.
To me, drug use and drug addiction and drug deaths kicked the crap out of COVID. They've been doing it before, and they're going to do it after. COVID really hurt us because we put everybody inside, and we put it to a different level, and now people are really dependent on things.
Wow. Yeah.
It's not their fault. It's not anyone's fault. It's just what occurred. We pushed people home. The drinking went up. The addiction went up. Our overdose deaths went up. But you still have denial from politicians and cities that said, no, we don't have a problem. Yeah, you do. You have a lot of different other problems that developed out of it. I'm not going to get into the big farm stuff and everything, because a lot of people want to throw that as an excuse of what they're doing, and they're a big factor, don't get me wrong. Some people are like conspiracy theorists and says this is absolutely what happened. Well, it kind of is what happened, but if you're going to attack the problem, you got to deal with it on a personal level. the first thing you have to do is identify the problem and the issues in your community. And people don't do that. They want to start firing excuses and everything. It doesn't happen here or whatever. But we're really in a dark place right now with narcotics, with addiction. There's different philosophies. There's different areas of ideas to where this is how we're going to fight it. This is how we're going to stop it. But for me to you and anyone out there that cares to listen, it's not working. It's not happening. The addiction is continuing. The drugs are still being piped into our country. Different cities have combated it well in their own areas of techniques, and some are tried and they've failed. So I say that because I don't like to get off on excuses and tangents of conspiracy theories and the real giant problems, because you can do that all day long. But the drug addiction is such a personal problem, and you're such at the bottom of the barrel. There is an attitude of, who cares about you? So what if you die?
Wow.
Yeah, it's there. And that's hard to deal with, especially the addict. And, I'm not speaking for addicts, but I'm speaking for them in the way of them talking to me. And, what do I have to live for? Or why don't I just do it? Now, this could be bottom of the barrel, but in their own lives. But it's what it is. I'm very pragmatic. I'm a realist. I'm not going to sit here and lie. And some people, oh my gosh, I don't care what he says. I'll tell you what I've seen.
Yeah.
And what's occurring. And I love the question of that student, because that's not being answered.
Yeah.
It's not being answered for that student. It's a great research project for him too. And if he would, if it's the first thing I would tell him in parentheses or a hyphen star, whatever, hey, don't get discouraged with it, because you're going against not a mountain range.
Yeah, behemoth issue.
Behemoth of denial, not the addict, but the reason for it. That's why I do encourage people, if you have someone in your family, your community is suffering in some way, or affect your community or your world around you, to attack this. That's how you really do see results, and that is really how you see things occurring. And I don't want to get into the weeds of things, but yeah, I think I got off on a little bit of a tangent because
it's okay.
But
we're both educators. We do that a bit.
but to go back like to the 80s, to the 90s, to now, this 21st century, we're in the grease with narcotics, and we've forgotten about it. Because let's call it what it is. Our cartels are still pumping stuff in to this country, and they're coming from foreign areas.
Yeah,
I can speak for it. A lot of the big F word today is fentanyl.
Yeah, I was waiting for
the fentanyl. Yeah, the fentanyl is your organic, or not your organic. I'm sorry, it's your synthetic of a synthetic, and we can evolve into that. And when I say talk to experts and people like that, and going back to your question about the modern age and things, how things came about from organic to synthetic. The synthetics were great drugs and are great drugs, but they need to be used in the appropriate way. I've interviewed a lot of anesthesiologists, and they will tell you. In fact, most people listening to this right now, if you've had some kind of plastic surgery or something, you've had fentanyl used on you. There's all different methods of fentanyl. Is it a synthetic opioid? And it is powerful, but it's used every day the right way. You don't have this garage scientist pumping it out, or cartels open up labs and putting the product over other drugs, creating a counterfeit product from a big farm and affecting people.
Not to get off tangent, but isn't this what I think we were watching that Demi Lovato documentary the other day, and isn't that what happened? She got thought it was, I think she thought it was an opioid, but it was herb.
Yeah, we are jumping into a little bit of what's occurring, and we can talk about the counterfeit.
That was the word I was looking for.
Yeah, counterfeit. The term is counterfeit, and I don't know the entire Demi Lovato case.
I don't either,
but from what she said from what I know, she absolutely went out from some crackpot drug dealer, got the fentanyl pills. They were counterfeit, and she probably thought they were legit. And I can go into why they're counterfeit and why they're not in a second. But she took them. It was overwhelming, and it did their job. It put her out. She had no pain. The problem is with the drug that's counterfeit, you don't know what you're getting. I call it the cookie cutter effect. And this is what was taught to me.
Okay.
Or the chocolate chip cookie effect. And to learn this. So, a counterfeit drug, let's talk fentanyl. The big blue pill they're talking about, the M90s or 80s or whatever they have out there today. I forget. I don't know. I apologize. They got this blue pill out there. This is called the blue pill because they'll tell you it's fentanyl. Your people in low places, cartels and things like that, get a pill in a pill press, and they put a compound in there to go with the fentanyl. It's almost like on a cookie sheet is how they do it. And then they spread the fentanyl over the pill press sheet, just like so, just like you would throw cookies over a...
Wow.
But, and this, if cookies, grandmas or moms and everything, they make sure you get, let's say, 7 chocolate chips in each cookie, depending on the size. And that whole tray of cookies is going to have 7 chocolate chips. Okay. Well, you have an addict out there that's buying counterfeit pills. I'm just going to say pills in general. Counterfeit pills. They've come from some lab where all they do is spread in a powder form, let's say, these other pills in this pill press. They just spread it over them. And you're not getting the exact amounts from a scientific perspective. So you have an anesthesiologist that uses it. It's highly synthesized in a lab and everything. It's a regulated drug that uses it the right way, the right volume.
Yeah.
To apply in a legal, legitimate setting.
Okay.
Then you have these crackpots doing this and selling it out there. Your cookie may have 25 chocolate chips in it versus the 7. So they don't care.
Okay.
So let's go back to your speaking of Demi Lovato. When she bought those, and we're assuming, because obviously I don't know the case and I'm going off of what she said.
Mm-hmm.
She took a couple pills, maybe 2 or 3, and I've had cases of this where one pill doesn't do it, but the next one, you get the 25 chocolate chips, and it's overboard, and it's overdose. It turns your body completely off. It's an on-off switch, and you go out, and you don't come back. That's the problem in the dangers, highly dangerous of counterfeit pills.
Yeah.
Hence, a lot of people, that's why they do go to the cabinets and things and try to get prescriptions from old Grandpa and Uncle Joe or whatever. And I came back from the military and get their pills because they know it's legit until they get to the level where they don't care. But and I'm not going to get into drug dealing or anything like that, but that is kind of the phenomenon that has occurred with fentanyl. And I know we jumped into fentanyl, but if people are hearing the F word fentanyl, I'm telling you right now, if you're buying it from a street person or Mexico, it's counterfeit. It's not legit. So you don't know what you're getting.
Wow.
And that's what's scary. You're playing Russian roulette.
That's absolutely terrifying.
Well, you say it, something that we get, it's terrifying. It's a pandemic to us. And I used to not try to scare people. Now I try to scare the heck out of them. I tell them, this is scary stuff. Because if you have pain right now, you get in a wreck, you say, you know what, this guy in my class has some fentanyl. He'll sell me a couple pills. Hey, you feel good. It's just like Vicodin. You go home, slap him down. You're not an addict. I just want to get rid of this migraine that I have.
Mm-hmm.
You go to sleep and don't wake up.
I'm glad you brought up migraine in particular, because I've dealt with chronic migraines for over 10 years now, and only just recently actually started to get help. But I can testify to the fact that when someone is in debilitating pain,
yes,
you literally can't get up. You will try anything. You get to that point where you'll try anything. And that's why I said it's terrifying, because had I not been raised by a police officer, it's more than, I completely understand the mindset, and had moments in my own life where I would have been like, you're saying it's going to go away? I'll try it. And it's like that, people get to that point. And I think by the grace of God, that didn't happen to me. But that's why I empathize a lot with people who are dealing with chronic pain, people who are dealing with being overprescribed, opioids, and then because it leads to these bigger issues.
Yeah.
To the point where you can't, you just want it to go away. You just want the pain to go away.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because I've had a lot of friends be injured and things like that. I'll use my dad, Grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
He's recently had hip surgery. And it was like, it's okay, he's taking, your average Tylenol, then Motrin, and then some from the doctor. And you know him, he's not the addictive type. No. He's not going to he's scared to death. But he would always ask me, when do I have this surgery? And I go, you'll know. I go, the pain. The pain I had another buddy with another hip surgery at work. He was injured. You'll know when it's time. The pain is unbearable. It gets to a point you're like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I'll do the surgery. Well, maybe you're that person who doesn't have the money at the time, or you've started knocking, your pain tolerance is different, or you've started taking those pills and knocking them out early to where your body's addicted. And so pain is going to dictate everything you do.
Yeah.
And there's stuff, I've had my own doctors say, now you have a silent pain, a little bit of a silent pain in your back. And what's that? I go, you have pain you're not recognizing, but it's there from injuries and things like that. Now, I don't know the whole, Now, this is a doctor dealing with nerves, but your body's experiencing pain and disruption, and it's affecting your mood, it's a different kind of pain. There's nerves and things. I can't go into that, because I'm not an expert in it. But with my back injuries, the way a doctor described it to me, and sometimes you are in pain, don't realize it because your body becomes immune to it and acclimates to the pain and functioning that way. But pain, the point is, pain is going to dictate what you're going to do. You're going to get in so much pain, you're like, no, give me the drugs, give me the pills. I want out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it does kind of get in trouble, where you get in trouble.
You can get in trouble very easily with that.
Yeah.
I had someone ask me one time back when I was doing the stuff in DC, trying to talk to people about the opioid problem. And someone asked me, well, how do you, if you're in this much pain, because they can't see it, right? They're like, how are you still functioning? If you say you're in this much pain, how are you still up and running? How are you a teacher? How are you a grad student? And they don't believe you. And my response was, it's you power through it or you don't have a life at all. So you learn to deal with the pain because you have that will to do it. But that's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy.
We have functioning addicts all over the place, and unless you really know what you're talking about or what to look for, they'll trick you. You have family members that will trick you. And I know I mentioned it earlier, a push-pull effect. It's very common for people to take a stimulant after they've had a depressant on the weekend. So, and that's where something like your stimulant methamphetamine comes in. And I won't go into a lot of the groups of that unless, because it's not really the conversation we're having. I'll keep it in context. But so if I'm a person functioning every day, I need a little bit of stimulant to get through the day. On the weekends, I watch my football, I chill out, I take a couple of my pills, and I go into my chill mode, whether it's marijuana or your heroin or your depressant, your alcohol. But then Monday, I got to get back up and running.
Yeah.
I need a stimulant, which is a common stimulant now, this day and age, is an amphetamine or methamphetamine, to where it kicks them off. So now I get through the week and you're going up and down, and you are a hidden, actually functioning addict until something happens. You get in a crash, they draw your blood, and they look at, oh man, this person's got so much drugs in them, something was wrong here. And that's usually what happens. Not an actual crash, but where you do actually crash emotionally.
Yeah.
Where they do a blood test and they go, oh, wow, this is a functioning addict. And there's a lot of them out there on all kinds of drugs. And I don't like to identify each drug of what person may be, because there's drugs are all over the place, plus with the synthetic issue. Instead of your big 6 drugs, now you have hundreds of different kinds of drugs and hundreds of levels of the same drug because of the synthetic technology.
Yeah.
So it is a positive. It's just got to be used the right way. And it's not.
So it's good technology, but we're misusing it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Or it comes out another way. And
mm-hmm. So you're approaching retirement, and I kind of want to transition a little bit, as now that we've kind of debriefed this, looking forward, your expertise kind of paying things forward, because I'm real big on that. What would your advice be to new police officers who are going to be dealing with this for the majority of their career, I would assume? What advice would you give new officers or officers in the beginning of their career? How do we, and maybe tie that into like, what are your predictions? How does this issue evolve after COVID?
That's complicated.
Yeah, I know.
To try to keep it in context, that's very complicated. But if I'm dealing with a regular officer on the street, and I'm going to try to teach them today about narcotics, I think the first thing they need to observe is objective symptoms, and learn objective symptoms, someone under the influence. Because most of the problems they're going to aren't good. Tell me when cops go to good things. No, they don't. Whether it be a family fight or some kind of shooting or murder or whatever, there's an influence. Alcohol, other stimulant drugs, things of that nature. And I say that because in our training today, in our academies, the drug education is being put on the back burner. And this makes people mad, even the state. We are not educating our officers on crime-related or narcotic-related crimes or influence in our communities. We are being softer in the sense of looking at different, but looking at it differently. But a lot of our officers, a lot of our officers today don't recognize the effects.
Wow.
They'll pull up and they'll be handling their incident, and it's, that guy's crazy. Not everyone's crazy. No, there's an influence, and it's normally a narcotic. Then I'll jump a little bit into the elephant in the room, or hot zone a little bit, homeless. The homeless epidemic has a large percentage problem is narcotics.
Okay.
It is. And the other's mentally ill too. I would say the other is mentally ill, but those are the two big factors. Because people get down to the point to where you have guys that were stockbrokers that are now living under a bridge because of narcotics. That's extreme, but that has happened. That is real stuff. So for those officers coming out, it's a different perspective. I think we need to get back into the training of the objective symptoms, people under the influence. I think that will help. Looking for the narcotic in that crime. Although having this sense of mind, though, today that the view of narcotics is softer. The view of the enforcement of narcotics is less. And people are like, oh my gosh, it's a liberal thing, they don't want to. In actuality, it's more of a sympathetic thing to the addict, and not putting all the addicts in jail versus not as much criminals, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that disagree with me. That's fine. But I see it firsthand.
Yeah.
We're lightening the load or the arrests on a lot of these drug people. But there's still a thread there that needs to be looked at, and I think that's what needs to be enhanced to our new officers today. Not at any fault of theirs, but you're being raised in a different world after COVID. It's a virtual world. You're not identifying a lot of things. There's a lack of personable skills. They're handling things more online and more on the internet, and not in connection emotionally with the victim. That could be good. That could be bad. I think it's a bad thing for especially a police officer that's supposed to deal with a community that they care for, or supposed to be engaged with their community. That's not good. So COVID has hurt us, and I think it could have helped us, but you have to acknowledge what it's helping you with, and it's the exposure of addiction and things like that. It has enhanced a lot of problems. That's what you have to acknowledge and not look the other way. And for those officers, that's what I'm seeing with young officers. They just don't have the foundation and the training base for narcotics, when it's probably 80% of your problems in communities and why things are really occurring.
Yeah.
I guarantee you, you can go to any scene or any crime scene, they're going to take blood from somebody, or any crash, they're going to take your blood. Well, why? They have to know if you're under the influence or not. It is a contributing factor and a crime. Or maybe things in your own neighborhood. Maybe you have neighbors that are fighting. What comes up first? Well, so-and-so's not taking his medication, or so-and-so's drinking. So to say that controlled substances, to keep it general, do not affect a crime or something is you're highly delusional. It's absolutely a factor in society. That's why I liked a little bit of the candor with this, because I don't have to be politically correct for the most part. I can be honest.
Well, it's history. Me. We're not trying to be politically correct.
Well, yeah. Well, history is how you're going to learn about it.
Yeah, you got to talk about it.
Because through history, it was used as pain relief and other medical, as doctors develop medical issues, but it also was used for, like, witch doctors and things like that.
Yeah.
Hallucinations and.
Well, a moment ago, I asked you, how do you think things are going to change after COVID? But as you're talking, I'm kind of thinking maybe I should change my question a little bit, because now I'm thinking, in your opinion, are we ever going to go back to what life was like before COVID? Or are things forever different?
I think things forever different. I don't even think COVID was the real main reason, but it's a major contributing factor that sped it up. Because the virtual world was coming. The technology was coming virtually. Let's talk the virtual world and
like digital technology.
Digital technology. Now we have college. You've seen it in colleges.
Yeah.
I think eventually that was coming. I think COVID, as it occurred, just shot it into the future a good 10, 25 years.
So it propelled us, whether we wanted to or not.
Well, here we are.
Yeah.
You can say, no, it didn't. No, it did. We're here. Here we are in this day and age of virtualness now. And
that's funny to me, because I know many people who would say, we just took 10 steps, 100 steps backwards. But in some facets of society, like you said, it's like, no, we just took 100 steps forward.
Yeah, and I think it depends on what context you're speaking in, too. Me, in the context of technology, it shot us forward.
Yeah.
We're way out there now. And it's leaving a lot of people of generation in the dust. And it's even in front of many of people today, the new generation. It's even in front of them, and they're even playing catch up to a lot of technology and a lot of other technologies that are out there. So it's almost like a compression. And you said people that think we're going backwards. I don't think we can go backwards anymore right now, conventionally speaking.
Yeah.
Unless it's all gone overnight, but now you're talking catastrophic, events. But and I'm not going to get into all that, but because just to keep it to what we're talking about and answer your question.
Well, there is something. If you're okay with continuing on the interview a little bit more, I do have a few other questions.
Go ahead.
I recently I was a guest on a podcast where I talked a little bit about the millennials and their place in world history and why I think it's so unique. But I got a lot of that from you, from kind of our family talks and what you've seen at work and how millennials operate. And you once said that something along the lines of you thought millennials were running the world, but that they didn't know it.
Yes.
Do you still think that?
Yeah, I do.
And why is that? Because I want everyone to hear it, because I liked it.
Well, I think
I think it was a good explanation.
It comes down to the evolution of technology, and people don't want to acknowledge that. And COVID's a good marker in history. Let's just stop at COVID, because millennials today were functioning before COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And no matter like my generation, X or whatever, wants to talk about millennials, those days of, millennials are this, they're over. Now X and millennials are together dealing with a new generation out of COVID, and COVID has propelled us. It almost has us in conflict, but it also has us coming together in a weird way.
Mm-hmm.
And before COVID, millennials were starting to run things. They're being elected. They're getting into positions of power. They're bringing up new technologies and raising these Uber companies. You know, I'm older than Musk or Bezos and those guys like that. Those guys aren't telling millennials. You tell me they didn't change the world?
Yeah.
Look at what's changed. I don't even go to a store now to order underwear. You know? I don't go to Walmart or Target or J.C. Penney's. I'll go way back. I'll go by J.C. Penney's or Woolworth. Things are like, what? Sarah's like, what's that store?
Well, we still have J.C. Penney. I don't know the other one, but I'm just kidding.
I'm just throwing it out there. But to say that millennials have not, you'll hear the term, oh, they're so stupid. They're not stupid. I think they're some of the smartest people in the world. They've had to be. Where I was in transition from old school to new school technology, millennials are raised with new school technology to supersonic technology. Yeah. Now you got the supersonic kids coming up. I mean, you've seen them. They're 3 years old and they got an iPad at their dinner table.
Well, remember that story I told you the other day about when I was a substitute teacher? And yes. I think it was a third grade class. And this was a few years ago. But I had a student who was reading an actual book, but kept swiping their hand on the physical page as if it was an iPad. And they were, it was like a weird moment where their brain just kind of stopped. And it was like a muscle memory of, I'm reading, but I need to swipe and not registering that this is an actual book. And I think some teachers would see that and be absolutely terrified. But there's another side to it where it's like, no, this next generation is even the one so after Gen Z, their brain moves faster than their body can keep up with them. Yeah. That's what I think.
So a unique discussion.
When I see that.
Unique discussion, the future.
And going back to millennials as well, the way that I phrased it based off of our conversation whenever we talked about that was that I think millennials are unique because of their place in world history. They grew up with digital technology. They will be.
They're the first generation too.
Yeah. So they're the last. They will forever be the last generation to ever grow up in an analog world, and simultaneously the first one to grow up in a digital world. We literally, I know I'm a white girl, but I mean it. We literally grew up
I understand.
with digital technology.
Yes.
It's trippy when you think about it.
Oh, it's weird.
It's weird.
Because I tell you, because we're coming obviously analog and beyond into digital. You want to call it digital? I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
No.
We were compressed. So let's just say for the sake of conversation, X and millennial generations, COVID we hit the wall and we all got compressed. And it changed the world. But the conflict before that, if you remember, there was a big conflict. They were having classes for millennials, how to function in the workplace and how for etiquette.
I do remember that.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't remember that. I remember Washington, D.C. had a big class for interns. And these are young interns. They're in their 20s coming out of school, getting into Washington. But they had to teach them things. Mm-hmm. And the conflict there was the analog and the seasoning that analog provided you. Versus the lack of seasoning at that time in the generation that digital did not allow you to have. And people are like, well, what do you mean by that? When I mean seasoning, the X's, we were a social world one-on-one. We were introduced to cell phones and introduced to, I remember it was a cool thing to have a phone in your room. Say landline or hardline, you guys go like, what's that? Or a pager, what's that?
What is that?
With that, provided a seasoning for Xers, as let's say X for the sake of discussion, that in an etiquette that we revered and we thought it was important, or still think it's important, that the millennials, not at fault of theirs, they didn't have to do that. They had things instant. Mm-hmm.
Instant gratification.
I got you a cell phone in school. I got your younger sister, a cell phone. That's unheard of. Why? Because you needed to communicate with us. The world was changing. when you guys went to college, part of the budget to pay for it was you got to get them a computer.
Mm-hmm.
No, whatever the computer has at the time or whatever college needs at that time. You're not going to school without a laptop. You're not going to school without whatever. Now it's beyond, but I'm keeping in context for that time.
Yeah.
And I think millennials were some of the smartest people that's ever existed in the way of developing and dealing with things right now and having answers. And I think it actually offended, I'll say us, the Xers, because how do you have the answer already without the work put in?
Yeah.
Which
makes sense.
There's different opinions.
Yeah.
But I saw that. I saw that in coaching softball for your sister. I saw it in younger officers. I'm like, wait a minute, these kids, I would call them kids, they're smart. They're sharp as a tack. They can read and write and do all this stuff. But when someone gets in their face, what do I do? I got punched.
Kind of freeze and crumble sometimes.
I got punched in the nose. Well, that it's so it's different. Uber smart without the, and you got to chalk that up. And going back to, you got to chalk it up to technology. Technology has changed the world. It's changed the way we do everything. I don't think we're going backwards. There's no way we can go backwards unless you have an apocalyptic event and all the electronics are gone and now we're back to conventional drawing water from a well. I don't know. I don't think we're going to be there, that's wild conversations, but absolutely. I think millennials are some of the smartest people around. And I think you have seen that in your politics and things of that nature. Look at the conflict in politics, just generally speaking, in any subject matter. Any subject matter. You can talk race. We can talk, insurance, anything. It is conflict because it is old leaving and new coming in. And now you millennials are faced with, and you're going to say it, I'm going to watch it. Your kids are going to come up and you're going to be like, these darn kids, they're supersonic smart.
Yeah.
They're raised almost little computers. And it's, some people scare some people. I think it's kind of cool. I think it's exercising the mind of what it was should have been. Now we're finally getting there, but if that's along the lines of what you're speaking of.
Well, I mean, and I feel that a lot as a millennial myself, that generational tension and the way that when I think about it from the historical perspective, I think millennials are very misunderstood because we, for the most part, we are very fiscally conservative, culturally progressive. But what I think we will really see more so, because before I used to say we don't really know what the millennials are like politically. And now living through COVID, I think when things really start get back up and going, we're going to find out who the millennials are politically, finally. I think millennials are going to pop off. I think I'll just be frank, I think they're pissed. They've been screwed over in regards to finances.
I understand that. Yeah.
And
it's a different mechanism to make money.
It's completely
especially in a state like ours, California.
But
the whole ballgame has changed.
I think they kind of are waking up as to like, hang on a minute. We are different, but that's not bad. And the world is different. And we need to, I think the problem is I'm kind of over the whole millennials are entitled thing. I think we need to shift our focus and empower millennials because they are going to be the ones who give us the direction. Where do we go from this mess? We need to empower millennials to think like how millennials think, to give them the tools and the support because they're also the ones that bridge the gap with Gen Z. They're the only ones that can connect these two because of that growing up with digital technology.
I agree with that. Yeah. Because what is my generation doing? We're dying. I'm serious. Your generation is going to die one day.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all forget this dying thing. They forget all about it. They forget getting old. I don't care if there's technology or not. You forget, hey, this hurts, man. One day you're going to hurt getting out of bed. I'm like, oh, this sucks.
This sucks.
I'm 56 and I'm getting going to the next chapter of my life. But hey, you have aches and pains and friends have passed away. Mom and dad are old and you're taking care of them. It just happens. Life is taking over. So you're exactly right what you're saying.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Well, maybe to kind of transition to the end of our interview, I and you may not be able to answer this, or you may not want to answer this, but I'm going to throw it out there. As a historian and living through all of this chaos during COVID, it is so obvious to me, and this is probably because of my upbringing and a bias, but it's obvious that the voice of law enforcement is being suppressed, censored, and borderline erased right now. So as a historian, I feel a responsibility, whether you're my dad or not, to ask you, serving in public service in this office in law enforcement, what do you want historians to remember about how police officers were treated during COVID and still are being treated? What are the things historians might miss?
Well, first of all, if you're considering yourself a historian, nothing should affect you. It's history. Mm-hmm. Whether it's the new rise of Nazism. No, I'm saying, or it's going to be the perfect world in a week. Or whatever, and let's look at what was going on. If you're talking from a historian perspective, you have to preserve history. You have to preserve the bad thing. Let's talk about George Floyd, okay?
All right. Yeah.
Elephant in the room with a lot of things. Let's be quite honest with it. Let's just use that issue in context.
Yeah.
That's history. No matter how you feel about it, no matter what side of the fence you're on. If you're a historian and you don't factor in that event with history and law enforcement, how that has supersonic changed in law enforcement, you probably shouldn't be a historian.
Yeah.
That's my view of a historian. I have a ton of respect for historians, but I think sometimes they're their own worst enemy.
What do you mean?
They pick and choose what they want to research.
I was going to quote Emily there for a second.
What?
What do you mean by that?
What do you mean by that?
My feelings are hurt.
Well,
not that her feelings are hurt.
No. This isn't to hurt feelings. It's almost, by saying that, a boost and a compliment to you guys, because I like history, but I'm not a historian, because most of the time when I read it, I have enough wherewithal to filter what it is and what it isn't, but I come to a point where I don't care about it anymore. That's not a historian. A historian wants to know why, mm-hmm. this, and this. And I think the historians are getting caught up with wanting things to be historical in a way that they weren't.
Mm.
They just get on their own tangents. I've seen they get on their own little agendas, and actually helping it, or actually acknowledging history for what it was. Let's talk about the other elephant in the room: African Americans and police. Now, mm-hmm. this is huge. This is oh my gosh! There's a whole side that would listen to this of me and say, "You, what are you doing, you idiot? No, that's not true," or whatever. If police are not accountable for what has occurred between the African community and the police, we're crazy. And I'm telling you, people are going to try to erase, well, the 1960s happened, that happened, and that happened then. It's a part of our history, and it still exists.
Yeah.
And police have to be accountable for the mistakes they made, the mistakes, how would you say, the people before me, not my forefathers, but just people in law enforcement that made those mistakes.
Yeah.
That did not want to engage with that community, that still hated that community, that still treated them unbiasedly and things of that nature. And I'm using us to say that I'm open, to. Yeah. But let's say here's a historian going down the right road, a white person historian that wants to open that up. Are you going to be honest about it? Are you going to be objective to it, what occurred? Are you going to research one side or the other? Do you have a biased opinion going into it? To me, a historian has to go into it with no bias. What happened in the 1960s? What really was the context of it? What happened in the Civil War? What was the context of it? What happened with Abe Lincoln in his cabinet and all the senators and everything? What was the context of it? And some people want it to be something it's not. And you hear that all the time. Some of it's from a religious conjecture or something else, or some they've been, or a culture, the way they've been raised or whatever, and that's their excuse. And I'm talking about historians.
Mm-hmm.
An historian, to me, if I come to a historian, I want them to be honest.
Yeah.
I want them to be, and that's why, I mean, I know we've talked about this. I started our ancestry thing. I want to know. I'm getting to a certain point. I don't want to do it. I'll get a historian to do it. I'll get a pro to do it. And I put together a book of my family, but I wanted to know where it comes from. And I can't hide from something if it was in my past. It's what it is.
Yeah.
But am I ashamed of it? No, it should be an educational experience. And you look at any civilization, mankind, when it starts to fall, what do they start doing?
They erase the history.
They erase the history or they want to rewrite it. No one wants to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
That's wrong.
The quickest way to kill a country is to kill its history.
That's not a historian.
No.
It's not.
And I think I know why that is happening so much right now. And I didn't realize it until I got to Claremont and started working on my PhD, because it was borderline I was just completely immersed in postmodernist theory.
Yeah.
And I heard it explained at Claremont in a very simple way, and it just kind of put everything together. Like, now I understand why our field is kind of dying in a sense, or we're not being as active.
Yes.
But postmodernists, simply put, they write, and I'm paraphrasing, but they write about how history should have been, not what it was sometimes. Now, I know I'm going to piss off a lot of postmodernist historians, but they do verge on that territory of writing the history what the world should have been like, not what it was. And then that, even, I think it was maybe a month ago, I had a meeting with my advisor, and he said something along the lines like, what's your philosophy as a historian? Who are you as a historian? And I kind of joked with him, because I was like, well, my answer isn't very eloquent, but let me put it this way. When I was growing up, if I did something stupid, if I was being an idiot, my mom and dad would say, knock it off, like, get your act together. And I told him that. I was like, I think that's kind of what historians need to be for society at times, need to be the people who are like holding up the mirror. This is what happened. Good, bad, ugly, take it for what it is. But knock it off with the rewriting of history for what you want it to be. Yeah. And I'm sure, hopefully, I'll figure out a more eloquent way to explain it. But that's kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah. I think that brings up, you're exactly right. I think a lot of people in our society today with a lot of our issues are saying that. All they want is the acknowledgement of the truth. Mm-hmm. And not the wax on, wax off or snow job that people give them. They just, hey, acknowledge it was bad, please. Acknowledge this occurred. Yeah.
And going back to George Floyd, we got a little bit off on a tangent there. I remember when everything was when that was first starting to just pop off. We had a conversation where you said that the police officers you talked to, no one looked at that and thought it was okay. But no one was talking to police officers. Yes. And then you started bringing up questions about training, the training that was approved by politicians. Yes. and city policies, and how no one's talking about that in the mainstream media. No one's going to other officers and getting their genuine opinion.
Yeah.
Well, how did that make you feel?
Yeah, exactly.
No one did that.
Yeah.
I still don't know too many historians who are going up to police officers and be like, tell me your story.
Yeah.
And just simply passing the microphone. That's why I love oral history. I'm not saying I have all the answers.
That's a great subject matter to discuss too. I mean, obviously in the future. But yeah, you're exactly right. See, now, if we're talking about George Floyd, the unique thing about George Floyd in the law enforcement world that people don't understand, this is kind of, understand law enforcement, you got to understand how it's structured and how it is in our country. So on the West Coast, law enforcement is probably polar opposite of law enforcement in the way of training on the East Coast.
Why is that?
Training.
What's the big difference in their training?
More
though?
training.
Oh, not enough
and
training.
addressing things that happen.
Oh.
A lot of people don't understand, and I'll go out on a limb here. A lot of times when you're watching mainstream media, these are issues that were addressed sometimes 15, 20 years in front of an incident like George Floyd by other agencies.
Mm.
And that's why there's a lot of agencies look at it and go, whoa, what's he doing? No, we don't do that, da. You're talking years of training up to that point. And that's why there is a lack of knowledge on the whole thing, and everyone is put in the same basket for what occurred, law enforcement with that. And there is a different opinion. Most agencies are small in the United States. They're not big and established. And a lot of them don't go through a lot of problems that we do. And I'm not talking about Minneapolis. I'm not talking about that. But to keep it in perspective, law enforcement is what your community wants you to be. And if your community accepts that, that's what it's going to be, or what they desire. And while we're talking about George Floyd, this isn't the excuse for the event, don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm talking about is the training. I've traveled this country as a law enforcement officer and have trained and been involved in training. I've been trained federal, local, whatever, municipality of some type, from D.C. to L.A. And I tell you right now, the West Coast, for whatever, and I'm not going to go into the reason why, has some of the most advanced law enforcement training in the world. I will travel back east sometimes, and talking to officers, not their fault, but with such a minimal base training, it's no wonder things happen poorly. It's no wonder things occur like that. And I'll bring up one subject matter in the George Floyd thing. I went through the academy. I started in 1989. And when it came down to the technique of a carotid restraint or any kind of force, back then, this is 30-something years ago, hey, don't sit on the neck. Don't sit on the head. Don't do So that long ago, I was taught, you don't put your knee in someone's neck. You stay off vital organs. And I'm not going to go into the whole training. So a lot of West Coast police officers watch this and like, dude, we knew this 30 years ago. You don't do that.
Yeah.
The guy's saying he can't breathe. Well, guess what they told me in the academy? If you do that to somebody, they're not going to be able to breathe and you might kill them. And then you're liable. And you're going to get in trouble. So this new phenomenon of an officer being in trouble and tried is not anything new. There are officers that have been in prison since for acts like that. I'm not saying that, well, it hasn't been publicized, obviously, but that's been done before. There's officers that have been in prison that are already out before that have killed people or done inappropriate things. And it's not just an isolated, event. In our eyes, that's the way we're looking at it. But we're scratching our heads like, why? Why would you do that? Especially compound in this day and age of your technology of body-worn cameras and people filming. And yeah, you're going to be judged and whatever. And I don't want to get too far off on that because it's kind of out of context. But the point is, what are you thinking? What's going through your mind? And that's just keeping the context of training. But I remember that clearly to this day in the academy, and I didn't know anything. I was a telecommunications technician, and they told us how to apply carotid restraints and different things like that. And they tell you what to stay away from and what will hurt people. And it's like, sometimes we just scratch our heads like, what's wrong? And then I watched the trial. The training is not, how would I say it, up to date. There you go.
Yeah.
Up to date. I know I got off a little bit, and I don't like to go do that, but But yeah, back to your question, historians, you just got to be pragmatic. You got to accept what it is, and you may want to change the past, but you're not going to do it because you're not going to change people. And the past is going to repeat itself because people are people, whether they're uber smart, supersonic smart, or they're old, 150 years old right now, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
People are people, and they're going to deal with things the way they deal with things. And 500 years from now, if the world lasts that long, because everyone says it's not, but let's say 500 years from now, there's going to be a historian looking at this generation, reading these history books about the Civil War, 1960s, George Floyd, Rodney King, all this stuff they're going to be reading about and who preserved it. I don't know, because it's your own demise if you don't listen. You got to learn from it. You really do.
Yeah.
And we're seeing repetitive of certain ideologies and things in our own life, in our own lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary. It's scary. It's scary to watch.
I believe the quote, it's rumored to be from Mark Twain, and I'm not 100% sure if it's like truly from Mark Twain, but I think it is. But then even Jay-Z kind of had like his own spin on it in a song. But there's a saying that history does not repeat itself, but it sure as hell does rhyme.
Yeah.
I kind of, and I like that. I think it's true
because
we don't, because
I understand that though. I do understand that because it doesn't exactly repeat itself, but it does rhyme in the habits and ideologies. You know what? People still reinvent the wheel. They reinvent the wheel. You know, they'll do it today.
Yeah.
How to deal with something or what happened. Here's what we're going to do. Well, wait a minute. Did someone in history do that? Yeah. All the time. You would steal someone's thunder. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're reinventing the wheel and you're taking it yourself and making it yours. So I understand that context of that statement.
Well, I would like to end the interview on a high note. I always like to try to end on a more positive note. What would you say has been the most fulfilling part of being a police officer?
People. Working with people. Yeah.
Do you have a good memory? We hear a lot about the bad things in law enforcement.
I have a lot of good memories. A lot of it's just sometimes someone saying thank you that you've helped out or that's been a victim. You don't always get a response, but you know you did a good job. And that's what it's about. It's the little things and the little things you do for people in whatever community. People are good. People are good. They really are. You just had that small percentage of bozos out there that just don't get it, whatever race or whatever. That people overall are good. They are. They're good. And do I have an example? One example, I'll just do something real quick and an easy one. I had a lady give me a card one time with 6 of her daughters saying thank you because their mom was choking in a restaurant and I did a Heimlich maneuver on her and she lived after that.
I'd never heard that story.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And I got that card from all her. She had 6 daughters. I said, "Thank you for saving my mom." That was worth it right there.
Oh
that
my
was
gosh.
cool. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Dad.
No, you're welcome.
On the show. I think this will be very helpful. I hope my student gets to hear this, and
well, not all of it.
Yeah. Well,
keep it in context.
Hopefully.
That's Dad talking now. Easy, Sarah.
No. But
to your student, though. It's very important. Talk to subject matter experts. Don't just stop and expect one person on a podcast to say this is what to do or this is kind of go down to your local rehab clinic and do an interview.
Keep the discussion going.
Yeah, how can you help your friend if that's the case? Or
yeah,
how can we address this? It is a problem. It is denial, and it's still growing even with COVID and after COVID. This drug thing ain't going away, and that's a great question. Great research question, and he should continue that research on his own.
I agree. I think it's important.
It might take him in a different, and do it from the historical perspective.
Yeah.
And you'll learn a lot. You really will. And what he'll learn is how some people deny it. Some people look the other way and don't want anything to do with it. And that's tough to swallow. But keep it simple, keep it small, and keep it in context of your life and help someone out, and you'll be fine.
Yeah. Real life is messy and it's complicated, but
keep it simple.
If you're still breathing, there's a reason you're here.
You're winning. If you're breathing, you're winning.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dad. I appreciate it. And
we'll do it again sometime, I think.
Oh, we will, because I got more questions in classic Sarah fashion.
I got the answers.